In order to let our viewers know more about one of two openly gay congressmen in Washington, C.A.N. broadcasts the following interview provided by our cooperating network station in Ann Arbor, Michigan, the Lambda Report. The piece was edited for this broadcast. Coming out for Barney Frank has been a process, first privately and then publicly.
The one thing I found was, when I began to tell people who were important to me that I was gay, because that's obviously a very important part of my private life and myself, and there would be a barrier to kind of the complete friendship and sharing that you'd want if people didn't know that. What I found was most of the straight people I've talked to are themselves unprejudiced, but think that other people are more prejudiced than they are. And the reason I stress that is that I found it's got a political analog. Mm-hmm. As I think the great majority of my colleagues in Congress understand that discrimination based on someone's sexual orientation is wrong. That when it comes to hiring someone for a job, the only relevant question is, can he or she do the job? And again, you're assuming that this is not an individual who in private does terrible and illegal and nasty things to other people. But a lot of politicians who would like to vote in a manner to prevent discrimination, to be sensible about AIDS, to do things in a fair way, are intimidated because they think that the general public might be more prejudiced than they personally are. And so I really found I guess a lot of people have had the experience of coming out to a brother or a sister who says, gee, I really care about you, and I don't understand why you ever thought this would make a difference to me. Of course I love you, and of course I care about you, and it couldn't possibly have bothered me, and don't tell mother. And it's the political analog of that we have to deal with. So, I found that most of the people I talked to, virtually everyone I cared about, as I would have expected, was unprejudiced and caring. And then, of course, it was complicated for me by the need to do it publicly. And I will tell you that I had an intellectual dilemma there. I don't believe that what a person does in private with other individuals in a loving and supportive and caring way has any bearing at all on fitness to serve. The problem is that the press began to ask me, not if I was gay, because they knew. I wasn't hiding things. I was living my life the way I thought I had a right to live it, doing my job in the best way I could. But in those hours off my job, when I was free to choose my friends and to choose the way I spent my leisure time, the fact that I was gay obviously had an influence. It wasn't the only influence by any means. Mm-hmm. And I said to reporters, no, I'm not going to volunteer to you that I'm gay because I don't think it's relevant. And I don't know how to have a press conference and say, I would like to discuss the following irrelevant subject. I said to them, if you ask me if I'm gay, I will give you an honest answer. I think I give honest answers about virtually everything. And in fact, it occurred to me, for a while my position was, look, that's not relevant and I'm not going to discuss it. If I refused to answer when asked about whether I was gay, I think people might have drawn the inference that I was ashamed, and I'm not ashamed. That's a fact of my life, which I am prepared to acknowledge as well as any other. And so I said to them, if you ask me, I'll give you an honest answer. Now, for about a year, we had this kind of dance in which the press would say, well, we don't want to ask you because we don't want to look intrusive. We want you to volunteer it. I said, well, you want to have your cake and eat it too. You want to look like you have great respecters of privacy, but you want to write the story about my private life. So you want me not only to tell you about my private life, you want me to appear to be the one who initiated the discussion. And I'm not going to do that because I don't believe that's relevant. On the other hand, as I said, I won't lie. Finally, a newspaper did say, are you gay? And I said, yeah, so what?
Did he find that coming out made a difference with his constituency?
I think if the first thing people knew about me, or one of the first things they knew about me, was that I was gay and that I acknowledged it publicly, that might have given them serious pause, I'm afraid. I think there's still enough prejudice in our society, so if that was the only thing people knew, you'd have a problem. You'd have a problem for two reasons. Some people are just prejudiced. I think the anti-gay prejudice is eroding. It's not eroding nearly fast enough for, I think, the taste of any of us, and of course it never had any right to exist in the first place, so I don't say that in an exculpatory way about the society. But there's a fact that it is eroding. But it's eroded to a kind of interesting point. One of the things that Jewish people used to laugh about, less so because I think anti-Semitism is eroding far more rapidly in this society. And being Jewish, I've experienced a variety of prejudices. I should say that I'm also left-handed, so that as nearly as I can tell, I am a member of no majorities whatsoever, since men are also a minority in the world, as are white people. But the phrase that used to evoke kind of smiles was, well, some of my best friends are Jewish, which meant, in context, I'm not that crazy about Jews in general, but I'll make exceptions for my friends. I think we are at sort of that stage in general in the society, in the sense that there are still people who have a generalized anti-gay prejudice, but it is not as virulent as it used to be, so that it can easily be suspended when they meet an individual who doesn't conform to their negative and inaccurate views. As I said, that's not a situation I expect anybody to be happy about. It's a sign of some progress in the fight, but we got a lot more to go.
But what about his congressional colleagues? Did they offer any private support?
They were enormously supportive. I was a little concerned about that reaction because I'm in politics, one, because I like it, I enjoy it, and also because I've got an agenda. I mean, I don't, it offends me that there are poor children in a rich country. It bothers me that we've got political leaders who try to censor what we think. It bothers me that there are homeless people or that there are children starving elsewhere in the world. And I think that the justification for being in government is that you can reduce misery. I don't think I can bring happiness. I don't have that grandiose view. But I think properly used, government can do a lot more to reduce abject misery than it does. But I can't do that if I'm not effective. I can't do that if I don't have the respect of my colleagues, if they're not willing to accommodate me, if they don't like me, maybe they're a little nervous about the trouble I might be able to make them. So I spend much of my time trying to accommodate my colleagues so that they will move in the direction I think for public policy. And I worried about whether coming out would diminish my influence with them. Maybe they'd be afraid to be seen with me. Maybe their own prejudices would kick in. I'm pleased to be able to report that none of that has happened. I don't think there has been any negative impact. One of my right-wing colleagues, who was a fool, apparently has decided not to come to the gym anymore because he was afraid that I might somehow infect him. I have had other members, he's a Republican, I've had other Republicans report that to me incredulously. And the man is a fool and has very little respect on the floor of the House. But with regard to most of my colleagues, they have been very supportive. I think partly, to be honest, because as political professionals, they thought I did it in the right way. That is, I mean, I made it very clear to people, I am not announcing anything and I'm not hiding anything. I am acknowledging if you ask me. And I think they thought that I dealt with, and I thought hard about this. You say coming out as a process. Yeah, well, political coming out is a process. I mean, I was sort of leaking out for a while, trying to have people not be shocked when it came. I wanted, when the announcement hit the papers, for there to be colleagues of mine who, when asked by the newspapers, I hope would say, yeah, a lot of people have known and they don't care. And I think that sort of happened. I have not found any diminution in the way in which I'm able to influence my colleagues. And in fact, the announcement was in the paper on a Saturday. I walked into this office on a Monday, very nervous, wondering how people were going to react. And one of the most influential and important conservative members of the United States Congress was on the phone as I walked in, and my secretary said, oh, wait a minute, I'll put him on. And he's a man I'd worked with on some issues. He said, I just want to tell you I'm proud to know you.
Having been in Congress 7 years, Representative Frank knows the Republican Party.
The Republican Party in this country in the last 20 years has been moving steadily to the right. Maybe ever since Richard Nixon left, so maybe it's only 15 years. The right wing, remember, Gerald Ford as president came closer to being denied renomination than any sitting president in this century. There have been challenges to sitting presidents, but the first one that really jeopardized a sitting president's renomination, that went right down to the wire, was when Ronald Reagan, as the right-wing candidate, challenged Gerald Ford. That let people know how strong the right wing is within the Republican Party. And ever since then, Republicans have been pulled further and further right. They are influenced by the Jerry Falwells and the Pat Robertsons, the bigots, the people who would impose through the state their view of religion on other people in a coercive way, the people who have appealed to the basest kind of prejudices that people have got. And unfortunately, their influence in the Republican Party is enormous. And so the Republican Party has become, look, the Republican Party until the 70s was always for the Equal Rights Amendment. And now it's against it. Republicans always vote in overwhelming majorities, with rare instances, for the pro-discriminatory position. And that's the problem we've got. So I wish it weren't the case, but the Republican Party, as part of its general right-wing movement, has become full of anti-gay crusaders and even fuller of people who haven't got the guts to stand up to those anti-gay crusaders.
His response to recent repressive legislation is optimistic.
As far as the repressive motives are concerned, with Jesse Helms, to answer your question, I think he's motivated by homophobia and fear of AIDS and by just, frankly, ignorance and prejudice in general. I think he's a man who thrives on the negative and nasty and unpleasant sides. He's a man who appears to want to castigate other people and who would even use religion in a negative way, not as a way to express love and concern for people, but to make other people unhappy. But I should say that on the whole, we've been able, I think, to control that repressive stuff. The Reagan administration imposed a couple of things, but on the whole, the efforts to use AIDS as an anti-gay tool have been frustrated in most of the states and certainly at the federal level. When we voted on the AIDS bills earlier this year, in both the House and the Senate, people like Helms and Dannemeyer tried to put in this repressive, foolish legislation that all the public health authorities say is foolish, that the American Medical Association, the American Public Health Association all repudiate, and they get beat overwhelmingly. We beat Congressman Dannemeyer's efforts. That was the one case where even the Republicans, in some cases, the majority of them voted with us. Not usually, but we beat them by 2 and 3 and almost 4 to 1. I think that's a sign of the good sense of the public on these issues. 5 years ago, a lot of people were predicting that AIDS would be the vehicle for a lot of very repressive legislation. And at the federal level, we have prevented virtually all of that repressive legislation from going forward. And I want to be very clear, I'm not saying that things are good now or that we shouldn't be fighting against them. All I'm saying is that they're not worse. AIDS has not set us back in general, except insofar as it is in itself a terrible thing, and people have died, and that's obviously an enormous tragedy. But the political impact of AIDS that people feared hasn't happened. That is, the bigots have not been successful in taking AIDS and setting back further the efforts to be anti-discriminatory. It is not worse than Congress has been acting. As a matter of fact, Congress is less bad than it used to be. The only thing to draw from that is to keep fighting. That doesn't mean sit back, be complacent, and be thankful. It means that the kind of organizing and fighting and marching and voting and pressuring that people have done has had some positive impact.
What does he foresee for gay rights and this current Congress?
Things have gotten a little better in Congress in the 7 years I've been here in this way. When I first came here in 1981, if people were being asked what was the political impact of a vote on gay rights, they would tell you that it was terrible. They say, look, I'm going to vote that way, but it's going to hurt me politically. Now, we've had an evolution. They still don't see gay rights as you and I would like to see it, as we'd like them to see it, as just the right thing to do, and therefore you do it. But politically, when they calculate, their general sense is, hey, this is something which can help you or hurt you. In other words, we've moved from being a sure loser to being a tough issue. Now, we all believe it shouldn't be a tough issue at all, it shouldn't be an issue at all, but that's progress. My colleagues have learned that there are a lot more gay men and lesbians out there than they realize, and more friends of gay men and lesbians, and that there is much less prejudice out there than they thought. So I think the issue has moved into being a tough issue. Now, I wish it wasn't a tough issue, and that means we win some and lose some. We lost badly on the District of Columbia, and that was a terrible thing. But we won on the AIDS bill. It goes back and forth. What we have to hope is that these same kind of efforts that have brought us from being a sure loser to being a tough issue will bring us to being a sure winner. But no guarantees in this business.